Good evening, everyone. This is a special meeting of the Urban Design Commission to discuss some other business topics. Um, the pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting of the Urban Design Commission will be conducted by remote participation. An audio recording of these proceedings will be available by using the registration link once the meeting has concluded. I am Sarah Lewis, the liaison with the Planning Preservation and Zoning Division of the city. We'll start with a roll call vote. Andrew Abba,
Here.
Tim Hood,
Present.
Frank Valdez.
Here.
And Tim Talon.
Here.
I'm not sure if Deborah will be able to join us this evening. I do know that Sherry is not able to. So this is intended to be a more, as we have no cases, more of a casual discussion. Hopefully you've all had a chance to look at the material from the Raffi Properties application to the City Council for a zoning overlay, text amendment, and map amendment for the area known as Sumanova on Somerville Avenue. At the moment, this is a proposal because it's a zoning proposal, is in front of the City Council. The Land Use Committee and the Planning Board did hold a joint hearing, and they have left comments open until the end of this month, which is August 30th. So that's, I believe, Friday. So if we do want to submit a letter, there is still time to bring something together to submit in writing. It will be taken up at the Planning Board on September 5th. I don't know if it'll be on the agenda for the Land Use Committee or not. But that's sort of the brief overview. So if I can help answer questions, I can do the best I can. There's a lot of it that, sort of dug into details. They're asking for a lot on their property. I will say one of the concerns that we've talked about within PPZ is the idea that this is requesting transform area type development in an area that was designated enhance or conserve. So we've had some internal conversations, but do not have a response yet. So we're expecting to be asked by the Planning Board and the Land Use Committee at some point to weigh in on this, but we don't have a response formulated.
Can you explain? So I apologize. I'm gonna have a lot of just procedural questions.
That's okay.
Can you explain the enhance versus like what is that, those two designations, and how was the initial designation for this area determined?
Those designations are part of Summer Vision, which is the city's comprehensive plan. So it's Summer Vision 2040. And that was done with a committee of about 63 people and hundreds of people done as part of outreach across the city. And so this area, mostly I think because it is not in a transit area, it is sort of in a, it does have good bus connections along Somerville Avenue. But it is not a transit area designated to zoning. And so most of the transform areas are places like Assembly, like Boynton Yards. So they were the large areas that were sort of ripe for redevelopment.
Thank you. That makes sense.
You're muted, Frank.
Thank you. But the area had been zoned though, right?
Yes, it is zoned, it is currently zoned FAB with
Yes.
some mixed use zoning along Somerville Avenue. A lot of the
So
FAB zoning came from existing buildings that had ACE, the arts and creative enterprise uses in them.
is there anywhere in the zoning that says that it is possible to come back with some type of a master plan to bypass or to change or to modify zoning that has been in place? Because this is different than a CI district, right? The CI is like not zoned and it's open to potentially anything really or nothing. But this place had something set. Is there anything that exists in the zoning that says if you bring this forth to the city council and they vote on it, you can do it?
Nothing that clearly. So any property owner is well within their rights to ask permission to petition the city council to change the zoning on their property. And that's what this is. So there is no, the only thing that can be done by right is fabrication right now, which has a range of uses. Lots of them are art centric, lots of them are small manufacturing. If you think about Greentown Labs, so it's those startup and incubator as well as the arts type uses. So that's the by right, and a FAB district can go up to 4 stories. What it does do is limit those uses. So there's no residential permitted in a FAB district. There is no lab R&D as in big scale research and development type uses. It's more of the smaller scale incubator.
And overlay district. So is that actually changing the individual parcels or is it adding, I guess, what exactly is an overlay district?
An overlay district is usually used as an opt-in. So you could do the FAB by right without changing the base zoning. An overlay district usually is a way to allow for mitigation, additional entitlements, perhaps sort of higher increased density, more intensity of uses. But in sort of simple terms, in exchange for community benefits or something that the city needs. Like a lot of times, if you think of Union Square is an overlay district. So somebody could still build by the base zoning, but by working with the city and the master developer, then that's set up so that there are increase of density allowed.
And does the the Somerville zoning ordinance spell out what needs to happen in order to establish a overlay district? Or is this kind of a
It is part of the because it is a text and map amendment, it is spelled out. But all of those amendments go through the council first.
And then last dumb question before we get into it. So if we were to want to write a letter, do we have to vote on the, like, presumably somebody, Tim, drafts it and then we kind of thumbs up, thumbs down it. Do we have to vote on the letter to send it on, or is it, how does that work? Because we've never done that.
I don't believe you have to, I don't believe it needs an official vote. If you all come to consensus and we want to take a vote, so for the record, everybody is, sort of, we have everybody's approval or sort of on the record, we can do that. But I don't think we are required to, because it is not a case.
And the letter would be shared with the city council before their vote.
Yes, it would be, I would make sure that it gets sent to the full council and specifically the land use committee and the planning board.
Okay. That's all of my kind of done zoning procedural questions. I don't know if we want to go to the meat of it or not.
All right,
All right,
Tim, I'm
Tim.
throwing this one to you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for getting together this evening. I think this seemed worthy of discussion, given the implications on the urban design in the public realm of the city. I think the Urban Design Commission has taken up a couple issues, like this, where we don't have a formal role in reviewing them, but they have implications on the city, its public realm, and we provided input to the planning department. So I kind of thought of this in the spirit of that, not necessarily providing, a detailed recommendation on the zoning text amendment itself to the city council, although we could choose to do that certainly, but at least some input on the urban design implications, because it does seem like there's a little bit of a, to Frank's earlier question about whether zoning contemplates this. There is a procedure which is being followed for individual landowners to propose amendments to zoning, but typically, I think in every other case, it's been a district change, MR3 to MR4. It's been a text amendment to address something that isn't clear dimensionally. It's been relatively discrete issues. There isn't really a procedure within zoning for a developer-led master planning process like this. And consequently, there's no vehicle for real considerations of the urban design implications of such a proposal. I think probably some of you all are familiar with the PUD process in the city of Austin, planned unit development, where certain areas that might be seen as analogous to our transform areas are designated as eligible for a PUD. And so someone can assemble a bunch of land and bring it to the city and say, we're proposing this within the framework of this existing master plan. But then there's a review process, and BCDC in Boston is heavily involved in that design review of a master plan. So they're looking at the configuration of streets, they're looking at the configuration of the amount and configuration of open spaces, uses, density, building form, sometimes architectural design guidelines, depending on that. And there really isn't that here in Somerville. So I know I've had conversations with a couple of people, community members, just who are kind of feeling that void and wondering, was there, how do these issues get considered as part of this review process? So that's my setup for the conversation. I think this is a little different because we don't have an applicant here to give us a presentation. I think if you've all looked at the zoning text amendment, there's a limited number of materials that are included in that, and I'm happy to pull that up on the screen just for us to talk through and get familiar with.
Yeah,
that
yeah.
would be helpful.
Yeah, pull it up. And I want to say something to what you just said, though. The differences between the Boston thing that we're talking about, and we're all familiar with the BPDA, and the fact that there are these areas, many areas in Boston that are not zoned, and you propose something to the city, you say, hey, there's these areas, and this is what we're proposing. Here's my master plan, and it has to go through a process through, the BCDC, which is the design committee, which, it has to go through planning. So anybody can bring something forth, which is good, but it has to then go through the hurdles and procurement of the established committees. And it seems like in this case, and correct me if I'm wrong, somebody's proposing something, but it won't go through the processes of review and everything. It'll just be the city council level. It's to say, yes, you can go, I forget how many feet, Tim, like, 50, 60, whatever it is. And then boom, that's established without a review process from players such as us.
There's no
Which-
design review as part of
Yeah,
the
which
process.
Somerville did have a PUD process, Assembly through a PUD process, so it. I guess again, just trying to, so it left with the old zoning, that's no longer there. Okay,
That is correct. The parallel to a PUD in Somerville is the master plan special permit. But that's after the zoning is already in place to enable that to happen. And that's what's being requested here, is sort of to change the zoning so that they can do their master plan special permit.
so if the master plan is changed to allow this. We still review it at some point, but it's pretty locked in at that point, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
It
Sorry.
seems like it would be. It seems like it would be, Andrew, in that we're only then at that point be privy to what has been approved. So
Yeah, there's two, let me
we couldn't be like
clarify
one or two.
something here. Because there's two different steps. So what's going on right now is the zoning. And so we can write a letter and make recommendations, sort of, that's that. The separate conversation is one that we have started previously about the involvement in the master plan special permit process. So there's two pieces here. If we're going to talk about Sumanova right now, it's about commenting on the zoning. We still need to have a conversation that gets to, as we've discussed, the UDC's involvement and how that might change. And that would be a separate zoning change for the UDC to be involved in the master plan special permit review. But I want to make sure that we've got, those are sort of two, it gets easily muddled.
And the expansion of our role into the review of something like this. That is something that goes. Land use, who makes that happen?
That would be something that, let me look into that, because I believe as a commission, now whether it's just the planning board, whether you can bring something forward, I know the planning board can, but that's sort of a slightly different scenario. But as the easy way to do it is 10 registered voters can also make a zoning amendment proposal. So it could be, sort of the board and a few other, some of the residents can bring that. So that the commission, because you all are some of the residents and sort of with a few others, we could do it that way too. And let me look into whether the commission can actually do it on their own.
So I think that's a good question, and one of the things we could think about including in the communications commenting on the process. But I think there's still a distinction between the Boston process and the master plan special permit, in that when you go through a PUD in Boston, you don't have zoning to permit it. So there's a whole design review process that gets concluded. Then zoning gets put in place to kind of entitle the outcome of that process. This would be different because of the way the overlay district, what's proposed is written. And if you've gone through it, it's incredibly specific. It would entitle, essentially a very, very specific set of outcomes were this to be passed. So then when a master plan special permit is proposed and reviewed, it's going to be reviewed against what's in the zoning and that outcome that's already determined. My concern is that that zoning gets put in place, that's going to dictate a very specific set of outcomes that isn't really getting vetted yet.
Yeah, so a lot of the way the proposal is written is to essentially, it's written more like the PUD than Somerville zoning. So it is trying to tighten, it's almost written like this is the master plan special permit, not sort of zoning language. And so that's the difficulty. It's sort of a muddled, it's not really a zoning proposal. It's almost like they're proposing the zoning to conform to their master plan.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's essentially proposing a master plan special permit, but without the master plan special permit review.
Does-
Right.
And-
Does
Which is
any-
a process they would still have to go through.
Right. But they'd already have it entitled, essentially.
What is the feedback that you've seen or have gotten from, feeling the pulse on City Hall on this, from the various groups, City Council, Planning Board, ZBA? Does it seem to be that this is something that is being embraced as a positive thing?
I've heard lots of different bits and pieces, everything from, of course, we are totally pro-development, to, this is too big. So it's really interesting. It's been a project that has sort of been completely split in the bits and pieces that I've heard. So trying to balance somewhere between the two is what we've been at the staff level. That's what we've been talking about a lot, because of course those are serious extremes. There is even, sort of the issues of shadows, transportation, sort of everybody has all their own individual questions as to, sort of how does this parked, how, sort of is there, because it's not in, sort of in the donut hole of transit areas. So it's actually, I'm racking my brain as I'm thinking, which is never a good idea, but it's been all over the place, and right now it's all casual. I have not, until public comment closes, I won't look at any of the written comments, but I know there's been lots coming in.
So I know, just to add to that, in the absence of review process to kind of work through all those issues, just to, how do you balance transportation access? What should the open space really look like on a site like this? What are the opportunities? What should the percentage be? What's the appropriate height? The shadow impacts. I think in the absence of that, there are a fair number of community members that are looking to the community benefit process to provide input on zoning. And so that's a private negotiation between the Union Square Neighborhood Council and the developer about basically where the developer meets with them in an effort to secure their support, looks to promise individual benefits, which is fine. Certainly the right of those organizations to work together and hopefully come to agreement.
Now, the difficulty there, Tim, is That usually happens at the master plan level, not at the zoning level.
And I think the challenge is that there are some that are, in the absence of any other process, looking to that to define zone parameters as well. Which I think is concerning, because there isn't.
What's really interesting is if you look at the plan that you have in front of you, that residential area between Prosperity and Dane Street is completely in shadow because it is completely due north of, you know, the development. So if you have 8-story, 6-story, and 9-story buildings, that area will never see anything from the sun, just because of the way that it's located. So it will be entirely in shadow. And I don't know.
So-
I mean, it's a church and some new development, but
Where is this graphic taken from? And I only asked because I was on the Summer Nova site looking at was it July 9th presentation. I'm not sure if that was the most recent, but they were showing like master plan overlay district in the area just north of block 3. They're looking for like to change the zoning for additional areas that's not shown here.
That's a great point, Tim. This is the quote unquote master plan that was included. This is from the zoning text amendment, the materials that were included with that. That's what I have pulled up here. But if you look at the actual boundaries of the overlay district, it includes this building here, it includes some stuff over here. I think it might include some stuff over here as well. So certainly the implications of that would be, you know, allowing a building that's of the size and nature of these other proposed buildings on this site.
And so essentially they're proposing a level of open space. I'm assuming there's a percentage in here somewhere based on this plan and these open space locations.
Yeah, and I think it's a little confusing how they describe it and define it as well, and perhaps a little misleading. There are 2 areas labeled park here, facing onto Dane Street. I think we know there's a grade change here, kind of coming up over the bridge. And one of the things that we talk about is does this really work as a configuration for usable open spaces kind of opposite each other on the street with a grade change? There is this area labeled courtyard, which is planned as a shared street connecting to Park Street, which is an idea I actually like, connecting Tyler Street through to Park Street. But my reading of Somerville's open space definition is that if it's open to vehicles, it's not considered a civic space, an open space. And then there's this courtyard area here. I think the percentage I'm coming up with is about 11% open space.
And
if you
they
compare
had-
that to
I
like
just found that they increased it in this proposal to 18%. And that does, where are we? 37,000 square foot courtyard park. So I think that's the block 2 and 4. 7,200 square foot daycare park. And that might be by the Housing and Community Center.
It'd be semi-public, if we're honest. If it is actually serving a daycare function, then it would need to be closed during the day.
Yeah. And then the public room. So what's the dojo at the moment is a community center, and so they want that to count as civic space too, as I understand it.
to the interior space. Okay, so I guess that's how they get to 18 Counting this courtyard, which has, there's a curb cut here. This is open to vehicles. I don't think this counts as open space. Some of those zoning, but then also including the areas around the building, which is fine. But for comparison, Union Square had a 17.5% civic space requirement. Boynton Yards, it's 20%. Assembly is 25% civic space. And this is coming in around 10, but maybe 18 to count this. The other, to Frank's point, this courtyard is going to be in shadow all but basically 24 hours a day, all but the summer months. The same thing with the courtyard, for at least 6 months out of the year. This is 100% in shadow. Some of those zoning specifically talks about the orientation of open spaces and how they should be located to maximize solar exposure.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at the plan itself, the open space looks like it's less than the cemetery, which I don't look at the cemetery and think this is a grand open space. So it just sort of strikes me that a lot of developments that I look at are very bold with the amount of architectural development that folks are willing to throw out there, and very timid with the amount of landscape and open space. And this feels very timid in terms of what's being proposed, looking at the context of this.
I think that the story here, in reality, Sarah, should be that this is supposed to be a precedent, right? That we're setting for potentially a future of things to happen, because this will set a precedent. And I think that Tim Talon has made that point, is like, this is going to set a precedent. But if we can set a precedent, or if this can set a precedent for something that is positive, green space, parking, pedestrian, I think it's a positive thing. If, I don't think we're opposing it. We're not saying no. But what we're saying is, like, I think that if there were implications of establishing some parameters that say, okay, think of the future, this is not showing enough green space, you should have more green roofs, you should have like a series of things that I think that as a committee we can come up with and say that really depict an approach to a future development that we haven't been able to establish yet, but that it's going to be impactful moving forward by reducing traffic, by having less parking, by having more bike accessibility, by having better green space, by having all of these things. I think it could be something allowing, not complete shadow lines on these things. I think that implementing some of these things as approvals get done, so that people can not just ask for higher density and height, but there are things that are triggered to make sure that it's being done, hopefully, in a good way.
And to that point, nobody's gonna fight higher density. Like, I don't think anyone on this committee is particularly opposed to that. Possibly in this location, maybe, but like in general. But it should result in meaningful open space. It should result in something that is a benefit, that when I look on the plan, I see an open space that feels like it carries the same weight as the building footprints, which this does not. This feels like I'm looking at the leftover space.
Okay, all right, I'm taking some notes as we go through, so that I'm operating right now under the presumption that what I'm collecting is elements that you might want to include in your letter. Should you decide that that's the way it's going. So we've talked about civic space, amount, quality, and the orientation is problematic. We've touched on the mobility issues. before we get into that a little bit deeper, because obviously the mobility issues are tied to the intensity of development, do we want to talk about land use and potential heights?
Can I just make one more open space related comment?
Absolutely.
And that has to do with the streetscapes, which are depicted in a number of the renderings. And I think in a way that, they're kind of fuzzy renderings, and who knows what the actual streetscape is. But a component of this would reduce the required sidewalk width from 18 feet to 12. So Somerville zoning requires an 18-foot sidewalk next to a highway.
That should not be allowed. Like you should not be able to be exempted from the 12-foot sidewalk period.
And I think in addition to that.
You should be much higher in a district where you're proposing an 8 and 9 story building. Like Assembly doesn't have 12-foot sidewalks. They are larger than that because they need to be, because those buildings are large.
I agree 100%.
I think it's also like, and I don't know where this weaves in, but because of the process, and this is being reviewed by city council. If that's what's happening here, I think it's wildly problematic that this isn't being reviewed by somebody knows, by landscape architects and architects, like frankly, like folks who can actually read the plans. Because I think to Tim's kind of point, this is all very, very fuzzy. And I think that there's probably stuff that is going to get codified if this goes forward that is probably not understood by people who are
Yeah, I mean, nobody in the
don't
city
have
council, yeah, nobody in the city council is trained as an architect, landscape architect, urbanist, or anything. And then the only one who actually, I think, in the planning of ZBA is Josh Softy.
I don't think he's there anymore.
He's not on the ZBA anymore.
Oh, well, there you go.
There are architects, but keep in mind, the ZBA doesn't review this. Amelia on the planning board is architect by training, works in the development world.
She works at WS, yeah.
I'm drawing a blank on names right now, but the planning board does have a sort of land use attorney, so there are more
But all the
experts.
questions that I feel like we would be sitting here digging into if we were reviewing this as
Yeah.
a proposal will not be asked. Which is
I mean, it's
a damn shame.
it's not an opposition as much as it is how can we make it so that it's better and that it respects the future and does the things right.
Yeah, I agree, I guess. But that seems almost more like, because and again, I'm sort of jumping in late, I don't understand this full proposal, and we're just kind of looking at a plan, taking our guesses in a presentation. It does seem like the process needs to just be slowed or somehow, it's kind of more process that needs to be worked on to get this.
100% more process, more detail, more sections, more everything, so that it's better understood. I mean, this is just like very generic.
We're just looking at it. Yeah, I mean, we're just looking at the plan, but this is all there is.
Yeah, it's hard to determine, what would be approved in terms of the urban realm, like the.
Yeah, you would need to. Yeah,
Hold on
you're
a
right,
second.
Tim.
Hold on a second. Nothing within the urban realm will be approved as part of the zoning.
But
It
would
will
the setbacks would be approved?
The setbacks would be approved, the building types with the flex building type would be created potentially. But this is like a whole nother, somebody had used the term parallel universe. So it's sort of even separate and different than the rest of the zoning ordinance. So
But you know,
So-
when like the
those-
zoning was created for Assembly Square, there were guidelines that were set in place, right?
Yes.
This is, you know, the way that X amount of streets are wide, and you need this, you need that, you need this. They were very strict in a lot of things that were established.
And
It
Assembly
was-
was the same way. I mean, I would say if we do nothing else, like. We would strongly recommend that greater than 12 feet be established as the sidewalk setback. I would say that we need to make sure that they're actually doing all of that they're following the guidelines. For street tree plantings that are established in the zoning code, which includes, cells, the kind of all of the infrastructure, which. I'm a little worried that they're trying to get out of, again, not knowing this. It seems like that's a piece that is going to get screwed up if this is zoning specific, and that. I would say like 22% is a minimum open space that should be, and that it should be meaningful open space. I don't know how you say that, but.
Well, I think the way you said it before, that the open space should carry the same weight as the buildings. Yeah. Smart.
I mean, I would say like. Setting a total open space percentage and then. Setting a minimum percentage. For the courtyard, for that one common one, so that it can't shrink down and we end up with 3 relatively equal sad little parks. That they have, that one gets enough weight that it can actually do something. Which that's what's gonna happen, is we're gonna get peripheral shit, and they're gonna try to sell that lunar as being the primary open space, which is not enough.
Now, I do want you to keep in mind that, so Andrew, I'm glad you brought up Milk Rose Cemetery, even though that looks like a park, that is definitely not a park. That is not always open to the public. That is a historic amenity. There is the
Conway.
Conway right to the left, as far as the sort of large, active uses. But
It would behoove them to make that much more obvious.
but
But
the,
no, that's a good point,
yeah.
but also like. Yeah, They should, I get worried that these little open spaces don't actually add up too much.
yeah, because the courtyard is all paved anyway.
It's all paved. and it's
The
all
courtyard is
shadowed.
gonna be. Depending on how, like, if they can activate it with the housing, the community center, that would be great, but otherwise it's gonna feel pretty privatized because it's centralized and off of a street. I think Tim pointed out really valid grading issues that are gonna be a challenge on the Dane Street parklets. And parklet is what it should be called, because it's about the size of a typical 3-family lot.
I can't tell, is this proposing that Pertzi Way? There's like an alley between block 1 and block 4, or is that building go to the ground?
I think they're proposing that as some sort of overhead connection, because I believe that alleyway would have to be service. But I'm merely guessing at this point.
Doesn't necessarily look big enough to accomplish that either.
No. And whether that, whether that's a ramp down to the service happens below grade, at this point, then that's part of the problem that we're seeing is the fact that we're asking those questions, and this is supposed to be a zoning proposal,
Exactly,
is problematic.
exactly.
So City Hall's taking comments. When do they want to vote on this?
I don't know. The planning board is debating it on September 5th, which is next Thursday. And I think that might be when the land use committee takes it up as well, but I'm not certain.
Is it possible for us to speak at the planning and just to raise our concerns from a design and architectural standpoint, like
So, yeah, so
formally
there's
as
a,
a group, not
there's,
as.
yeah, there's a couple of things going on. So I think what I would recommend, given the depth of this conversation, is I would recommend a letter be submitted by Friday. So that there is something in writing. The easy way to, because you are all Somerville residents, appearing at the planning board and speaking, or the land, sort of the land use committee. Now, the land use committee doesn't always take testimony. If the planning board sees that there are people willing to, sort of the want to speak on the issue, they're usually more flexible, even though the joint hearing has already happened.
Is there
So
some vehicle that we could speak as a unified group, like instead of as individuals speak?
that's the letter. I don't think verbally we have that option anymore. It's a maybe, because the joint hearing has already passed.
But if we show up there and it's 3 of us or more, isn't that considered a quorum?
Yes.
So I think one of the things the letter could do is offer to attend a meeting of the land use committee or planning board meeting or both to share, to discuss the proposal with them.
So presumably, planning or land use is not going to approve this in round one. As part of the letter, could we request that the future meeting be a joint meeting in some way so that we can show up as a group? The second meeting is a joint UDC planning thing, and we can talk for real.
Yeah, we can try that.
Because we'll do what we can with the
Yeah.
letter, but like that requires all of them reading it. Who knows if that happens, like it just. It again, like it just kind of keeps us at arm's distance in this process that I think. We have a role in and, or we should have a role in.
Yeah, let me talk to the planning board liaison. Let's see how that's going to go next week, and I'll see find out. Let me see what I can find out. The one of the things that I would probably recommend is hearing what you're saying. I think the first thing in the letter would probably be to ask for more time to review in detail. Given the complexity of this and the implications it does have on urban design. And then, sort of, because the level of, sort of the 18-foot sidewalks, that's not supposed to be in an overlay district. Sort of the idea that you've brought up about design guidelines. I think all those things are strengthening the request for more time for the commission to dig into this.
Planning board to compel the developer to speak with us, to come to a meeting as well.
That I think is more difficult, but let me.
I'm throwing everything at the wall. Try.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting idea to offer
Yeah.
to provide a review of this as if it were, reviewing the master plan. To
Yeah.
establish some submittal requirements. Also on the sidewalk thing, I think it would actually also allow the pedestrian zone to be entirely within the footprint of the building, so it would allow arcades along the front of all the buildings. The pedestrian zone. So everything outside the footprint between the code and the building would be.
Now that happens in a lot of places. In order to get that 12-foot, 18-foot sidewalk, it does involve private property. So there are easements in a lot of places that are negotiated.
No, I'm not talking about an easement. I'm talking about the building projecting over the pedestrian zone sidewalk. You know, this building specifically doesn't allow building upper floors to overhang lower floors, which, you know, debate limits and, yeah, but this would allow for that.
So I have a 7 o'clock that I need to drop for.
Well,
But
so should we,
you guys heard my opinion. I think there's no vote, but I'm in support of it. We're putting a letter together. I'm part of it, so I just wanted to express that and be part of it.
Can I ask a
supportive.
land use question?
Yeah.
So this is zoned fabrication. Does this overlay district, does this process link approval of the overlay with like a percentage of fabrication area, or is there any sort of way to define what area is included for fabrication, or how does that work?
I would have to go back and look at, I don't. The difficulty is with this, I haven't dug into it in that level of detail from the program yet, because usually zoning doesn't have program associated with it. But I'm scrolling. The way it breaks it down is, yeah, research and development, office commercial, arts and creative enterprise is 65,000 square feet. So that's normally those fabrication uses.
But are they establishing a certain percentage or limitation as to which program would be available? So that somebody doesn't come back and then at a certain point says block 4, 1, and 3 are all going to be residential.
Yeah, like if they
So-
want to sell the property or something changes and someone comes in and, you know, wants to do something else.
It would have to go back through a rezoning, because
Yeah.
this is so specific. If it gets voted as is, somebody would have to build this level of detail. And then if the use changes, then it would have to go back through a rezoning again.
But if the use says residential, they could build residential. What stops them from block 3 being entirely residential?
there are, other than the fact that you couldn't build a residential building in this big, I don't think.
Not in the Fab district, but in their
Just as
overlay,
practical.
yeah, overlay, it's allowed.
Is allowed.
So technically somebody can come back, right, Tim, and say block 3 is going to be all residential.
Yes.
There's a couple restrictions on the overall residential, but what's shown here in the pink represents about 6 or 7% of the total area here. I think the limitation is like 50% or something, so there could be significantly more residential. Yes, I think it's, you know, just as an overview, this block 3 is a 75,000 square foot footprint. This is larger than the Partners building in Assembly Row, and almost as tall. It's 9 levels plus mechanicals. They're proposing 20-foot floor-to-floor heights, 25 feet on the ground floor, 25 feet on upper floors, which I don't think there's any precedent for that in Boston. Really, any buildings of this type. It's what accounts for a 9-level building being 185 feet plus mechanical penthouse, 55 feet. It's 240 feet.
Yeah. Now, I can say, so the floor to floor height has to do with the concept of basically the businesses that are in Greentown Labs, the incubators, the startups, their manufacturing type functions, their prototyping needs the taller ceiling heights and then the heavier structure. And so that's where the floor to floor height comes from, as it was explained to.
Now, what they're trying to do is that they're trying to create a space that is super flexible for anything. As we all know who do labs, the minimum you want is a clear space for a lab. Minimum is 13.6. 15 is ideal for a lab, right? So what they are doing is that they're creating the most open space available for anything to happen there. Because a lab would be, oh my God, any lab developer would love to have 15 feet clear to start with. So, I mean, they're just leaving it open for anything because at a certain point they can say, oh, I can put a manufacturing lab, I can put a bio lab, I can put a chem lab, I can put any type of lab in there within that for research or anything.
I
So
think that's exactly right. And the reality is no one's gonna put 9 floors of
no,
75,000 square feet of prototyping space. You're gonna have some prototyping space. You're gonna have some research and development space, kind of typical conventional office space. And that, could be one way they could approach this, where there's.
I could say, yeah.
Pull
Yeah, 'cause I
lower
could-
on the podium, it's larger,
Yeah.
and you do something else on top.
Right. Because I could say, I would like to, have 20 feet for residential because I'm going to be creating artist lofts. And then what I'm creating is just, spaces that have mezzanines I mean, it's language. I mean, it's a lawyer writing this who's pretty smart.
Yeah, so that 20 feet floor to floor, that's the same across all these blocks. This one, block 1, it's 165 feet. This one's 125, same thing. Yes, plus mechanical penthouses.
Well, if we're about to lose Frank, why don't we do this? It feels like if each of you can email me some bullet points of your sort of the highest and best, the deal breakers, let's call it that. And then I will talk to Tim and I, Tim Talon, if that's all right with you, can do a first draft. And see where we go from there. Now, I'm actually on vacation today. I'm on vacation tomorrow, but I will be back in the office on Wednesday. Wednesday is pretty booked, but I can make time on Thursday and we can pull this together. So does that sound like a reasonable path forward? I have taken some notes about sort of some of the issues that we've talked about, but I'm sure there's more in there.
And that sounds great to me, and thank you for prioritizing this, and Tim as well for kind of bringing us to our attention and in time to actually do something a little bit, maybe, we'll find out.
Yeah, thank you. Should we direct comments just to you, or should we copy Tim?
I want to be respectful of the open meeting law. So if you can send them to me and the urban design @email, I think that's probably the best way to go. And then we can incorporate those into one document.
All right, that sounds good. Thank you, Sarah.
Okay, I do think we need to officially do the roll call vote to close if we're gonna lose Frank, unless I don't mean to rush the rest of you off, but I think we have a path forward, so I'm not sure how much we need to
You can go back to vacation now.
keep hashing, so.
Okay. All right, so can I drop?
Yeah, roll call vote, meeting adjourned. Who do we second? Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
Exactly.
Andrew seconds. Roll call vote. Frank Valdez.
Yes.
Bye, Frank. Thank you. Tim
Bye.
Talon,
Yes.
Tim Hood,
Yes.
Andrew Abba.
Yes.
All right, meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Tim, I will talk to you later this week.
All right, sounds good.
All right, yes, thank y'all.
Thanks.
Bye all.